She mocked my pizza uniform, so I parked a 65-liter jet in her driveway and dropped an ultimatum that left them shocked and about to lose everything. My sister-in-law looked me up and down with that practiced disdain she'd perfected over 15 years of marriage to my brother, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against her designer handbag as she surveyed my work uniform. "Pizza delivery, really, Marcus? At your age?" Her voice carried that particular brand of condescension reserved for people she considered beneath her social circle. I mean, what will the neighbors think when they see that beat-up Honda in our driveway? Little did Jessica know that her cruel words were about to backfire in the most spectacular way imaginable. Because while she was busy judging my pizza delivery uniform, she had no idea about the empire I'd been quietly building. She didn't know about the offshore accounts, the real estate portfolio, or the private jet registered under my investment company's name. Most importantly, she had no clue that her husband, my own brother David, was about to lose everything he'd taken for granted. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. Now, you might be wondering how someone ends up delivering pizzas while secretly being worth more than most small countries' GDP. Well, that's exactly what I'm going to reveal in this story. But first, let me give you some context about how this all began. Because the journey from pizza boxes to private jets isn't what you'd expect. The truth is, most people judge success by what they can see on the surface. The car you drive, the clothes you wear, the job title on your business card. They never look deeper. They never ask the right questions. And that surface-level thinking is exactly what allowed me to operate under everyone's radar for years while building something extraordinary. See, I've spent the last decade studying wealth creation, financial independence, and strategic invisibility. Not the kind of wealth that screams for attention, but the kind that whispers, the kind that gives you options, the kind that lets you choose your battles and win them decisively when the time is right. And after years of careful planning, meticulous execution, and watching my family treat me like their personal disappointment, I finally had everything in place for the most satisfying revenge imaginable. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this all started, because understanding the full picture is crucial to appreciating just how perfectly this plan came together. It was a cold Tuesday evening in March when I pulled into David and Jessica's circular driveway, the engine of my delivery Honda sputtering like it always did. Their house stood before me like a monument to suburban excess. Two-story colonial, perfectly manicured lawn, three-car garage that probably cost more than most people's entire homes. The kind of house that screamed new money trying desperately to look like old money. I grabbed the pizza boxes from my passenger seat, straightened my red delivery cap, and walked toward their front door. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was delivering dinner to people who spent more on wine than I supposedly made in a month. At least, that's what they believed. Jessica answered the door in her yoga pants and oversized sweater, the uniform of suburban wives who'd never worked a day in their lives, but somehow felt qualified to judge everyone else's career choices. Her expression shifted from mild annoyance to poorly concealed disgust when she realized who was standing on her doorstep. "Oh, it's you." She stepped back slightly, as if my presence might contaminate her marble foyer. "David, your brother's here with our food." My brother appeared behind her, loosening his tie after another day at the accounting firm, where he managed other people's money with the confidence of someone who'd never built anything himself. "Hey, Marcus," he said with that forced cheerfulness that barely masked his embarrassment. "Thanks for bringing this by." "No problem," I replied, handing over the boxes with a smile that probably looked more genuine than either of them deserved. "That'll be $37.50. David reached for his wallet, but Jessica was already warming up for her favorite pastime, making me feel small in front of anyone who would listen. "Marcus," she said, her voice carrying that tone wives use when they're about to deliver a lecture disguised as concern. "Don't you think it's time you found something more suitable for someone your age?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a kitchen fire. David shifted uncomfortably, probably wishing he could disappear into his expensive hardwood floors. Their teenage daughter Emma appeared at the top of the stairs, no doubt drawn by the familiar sound of her mother's condescension. "I mean, Jessica continued, clearly enjoying her moment in the spotlight. Pizza delivery is fine for college students, but you're what, 42 now? Don't you want something with more dignity, more respect? The word respect rolled off her tongue like she was tasting something bitter. This from a woman who'd married into money and spent her days organizing charity events where she could network with other wives who'd done the same thing. The irony was almost too perfect. Jessica, David said quietly, clearly uncomfortable with his wife's public humiliation campaign. Maybe we should— No, David, she interrupted, her voice gaining momentum like a train leaving the station. Someone needs to say this. Marcus, you're embarrassing yourself. You're embarrassing our family. When the neighbors see that car in our driveway, when they see you in that uniform, what do you think they assume about us? And there it was. The real concern. Not my well-being, not my dignity, not my future. Her reputation. Her standing in the suburban social hierarchy that governed her entire existence. The neighbors might think less of her if they knew her brother-in-law delivered pizzas for a living. I stood there for a moment, letting her words settle in the expensive air of their foyer. Behind her, I could see into their living room with its leather furniture and gas fireplace, all purchased with David's steady but unremarkable salary. Above us, Emma was pretending to scroll through her phone while obviously listening to every word. You know what, Jessica, I said, my voice calm and measured. You're absolutely right. Her eyes widened slightly, clearly not expecting agreement. David looked confused, probably wondering if I was about to apologize or explode. But I just smiled and nodded thoughtfully. You're right that appearances matter, I continued. You're right that people judge you by what they can see on the surface. And you're definitely right that respect is important in this world. Jessica's expression shifted from surprise to satisfaction, clearly pleased that her intervention had finally gotten through to her stubborn brother-in-law. David relaxed slightly, probably relieved that this confrontation was ending without drama. But here's the thing, I said, my smile widening just a fraction. Sometimes the most successful people are the ones you'd never suspect. The confusion returned to their faces, but I was already backing toward the door, pizza money in David's hand, my work here temporarily complete. Thanks for the payment, I called over my shoulder. Oh, and Jessica, you might want to clear your driveway this weekend. I'm expecting a delivery myself. I climbed back into my Honda and drove away, leaving them standing in their doorway with matching expressions of bewilderment. In my rearview mirror, I could see Jessica already turning to David with questions, probably demanding to know what I meant about clearing their driveway. If only she knew what was coming. The drive back to the pizza shop gave me 20 minutes to think about the conversation that had just unfolded, and more importantly, about the conversation I was going to have with my financial advisor the next morning. Because Jessica's little speech hadn't just been insulting, it had been perfectly timed. You see, for the past 3 years, I'd been waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth about my situation. Not because I needed anyone's approval or validation, but because I'd learned that timing is everything when it comes to delivering life-changing surprises. And Jessica had just provided me with the perfect opening. The pizza delivery job wasn't desperation or failure to launch, it was camouflage. The best kind of camouflage, actually, because it was so effective that even my own family never looked deeper. They saw the uniform, the car, the modest apartment I maintained as my official address, and they made assumptions that let me operate completely under their radar. What they didn't see was the offshore investment portfolio that had been growing steadily for 15 years. They didn't know about the real estate holdings across 3 states, carefully managed through shell companies and trusts. They had no idea about the technology startup I'd sold to Google for 8 figures, or the cryptocurrency investments I'd made when Bitcoin was still trading for less than $100. Most importantly, they didn't know about the private jet. Now, I know what you're thinking. How does someone accumulate that kind of wealth while appearing to deliver pizzas for a living? The answer is simpler than you might expect, but it requires a level of discipline and strategic thinking that most people aren't willing to develop. It started with a choice I made in my early 20s, right around the time David was getting married and starting his conventional path toward suburban respectability. While he was focused on steady paychecks and mortgage payments, I became obsessed with understanding how money really works. Not the surface-level stuff they teach you in school, but the deep mechanics of wealth creation, tax optimization, and financial invisibility. I read everything I could find about successful investors who'd built fortunes without anyone noticing. I studied the strategies used by ultra-high net worth individuals to maintain privacy while growing their assets exponentially. Most importantly, I learned that the most powerful wealth-building tool isn't just money itself, but the ability to operate outside conventional expectations. The pizza delivery job served multiple purposes in my strategy. First, it provided a completely unremarkable cover story that satisfied everyone's curiosity about how I spent my time. Second, it generated enough legitimate income to maintain my modest lifestyle without raising questions about where my money came from. Third, it put me in constant contact with successful business owners who often needed discreet investment partners for their expansion plans. But the real genius of the pizza delivery cover was psychological. When people see you in that uniform, they immediately categorize you as someone who's struggling, someone who's failed to launch, someone who poses no threat to their own status or success. They stop paying attention to your real activities because they've already written you off as irrelevant. And that invisibility? That's worth more than any luxury car or expensive watch could ever be. While my family was busy judging my pizza delivery uniform, I was quietly closing deals that would have made their heads spin. The beauty of operating under everyone's radar meant I could pursue opportunities that required absolute discretion. Wealthy clients don't want their investment partners showing up in Lamborghinis, drawing attention to business relationships that are better kept private. Take the Henderson deal, for example. Robert Henderson owned a chain of auto repair shops across the Pacific Northwest, and he needed a silent partner to help him acquire his biggest competitor. The kind of deal that required someone who could move serious money without anyone asking questions about where it came from. When I showed up to our first meeting in my delivery Honda wearing jeans and a polo shirt, he almost turned me away until I casually mentioned the seven-figure investment I was prepared to make in cash. 6 months later, Henderson Auto Group doubled in size, and my 30% stake was worth more than David made in 5 years. But to my family, I was still just Marcus the pizza guy, struggling to make ends meet in my modest apartment. The apartment, by the way, was another stroke of genius. A simple 2-bedroom rental in a middle-class neighborhood, furnished from discount stores, with a 15-year-old television and a kitchen table I'd bought at a yard sale. The perfect stage set for maintaining my cover story. When David or Jessica occasionally visited, they'd see exactly what they expected to see. Evidence of a man who'd never quite figured out how to succeed in life. What they didn't see was the secure home office in the back bedroom, equipped with encrypted computers and satellite internet that connected me to financial markets around the world. They didn't notice the industrial-grade safe hidden behind a bookshelf full of paperback novels. Most importantly, they never questioned why someone struggling financially would need 3 different cell phones. The phones were crucial to my operation. One for pizza delivery, one for family and personal use, and one for business that generated more money in a single call than most people made in a year. I'd learned early that successful invisibility required complete compartmentalization. Every aspect of my real life had to be kept separate from the persona I presented to the world. By my 40th birthday, the portfolio had grown beyond anything I'd originally imagined. Real estate investments in emerging markets that tripled in value, technology stocks purchased years before they became household names, a diversified collection of assets that generated passive income exceeding 6 figures monthly, all managed through carefully structured entities that kept my name out of public records. The private jet came later, after the crypto windfall that turned a modest investment into something approaching generational wealth. I'd purchased the aircraft through a management company in Delaware, registered under a trust based in Nevada, with operational control handled by a firm in Florida. Even if someone had wanted to trace ownership, they'd have needed forensic accountants and several months to connect it back to me. Which brings us to last Tuesday evening, standing in Jessica's marble foyer, listening to her lecture about dignity and respect, while having no idea she was talking to someone who could have purchased her house with pocket change. The satisfaction of that moment was almost overwhelming. Here was a woman who'd spent 15 years treating me like the family disappointment, completely oblivious to the fact that her net worth was probably less than I spent on aircraft maintenance in a typical month. The temptation to reveal everything right then was almost irresistible. But I'd learned patience during my years of building this empire. Good timing isn't just about waiting for the right moment, it's about creating the right moment. And Jessica's little speech about clearing the driveway had given me the perfect setup for what came next. The next morning, I placed a call to my aviation management company. The conversation was brief and professional, exactly the kind of routine business call that happens hundreds of times daily in the private aircraft industry. Marcus here. I need the Gulfstream positioned at Spokane International by Friday afternoon. No problem, Mr. Sterling, came the reply, using the name on my business registration. Any specific arrival time? Make it around 4 o'clock, and I'll need ground transportation arranged to an address in the Hills District, something that matches the aircraft's profile. Understood. We'll have everything ready. I hung up and immediately placed a second call to David's office. His secretary put me through without delay, probably assuming I was calling about some family matter that wouldn't take much of his valuable time. Hey, Marcus, David said, his voice carrying that slightly patronizing tone he'd developed since Jessica started influencing his attitude toward me. What's going on? I wanted to follow up on Jessica's suggestion about clearing your driveway this weekend, I said, keeping my voice casual and friendly. That delivery I mentioned? It's going to be larger than I originally thought. What kind of delivery? He asked, curiosity creeping into his tone. Just some equipment I ordered for a side project. Nothing too exciting, but the truck is going to be pretty big, so I wanted to make sure there's enough space. How big are we talking? Well, let's just say it's bigger than your typical UPS truck. Probably need the whole driveway clear from about 4 o'clock Friday until sometime Saturday morning. I could hear him processing this information, trying to reconcile the image of his struggling pizza delivery brother with someone who apparently ordered equipment that required oversized vehicles. Marcus, what exactly are you working on? Oh, you know me, I said with a laugh that probably sounded more mysterious than I intended. Always got some project going. Don't worry about it. I just didn't want to surprise you guys with a big truck showing up unannounced. Should I tell Jessica? Actually, let's keep it as a surprise. You know how she likes surprises. The lie came easily, because it wasn't entirely untrue. Jessica did like surprises, as long as they were the kind that enhanced her social status or gave her something to brag about to the neighbors. This particular surprise was going to exceed her wildest expectations, just not in the way she might have hoped. After hanging up with David, I spent the rest of the week making final preparations. The beauty of having legitimate business operations is that everything looks completely normal to outside observers. Phone calls to aviation companies, meetings with financial advisors, conversations about logistics and scheduling, all perfectly routine activities for someone managing complex investments. The only unusual element was the camera crew I hired for Saturday morning. Nothing fancy, just a discreet videographer who specialized in corporate documentation. Someone who could capture high-quality footage without drawing unwanted attention from neighbors or passers-by. Because here's the thing about perfect revenge. It's not enough to simply prove your point. You have to document it. You have to create a record that can't be disputed or explained away later. You have to make sure that everyone who witnesses it understands exactly what they're seeing and why it matters. Friday afternoon arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that makes everything seem more dramatic. I'd taken the day off from pizza delivery, telling my manager I had a family obligation that required my immediate attention, which was technically true, even if the nature of that obligation wasn't what he might have expected. At 3:30, I positioned myself at the coffee shop across from David and Jessica's neighborhood with a clear view of the main entrance. The timing had to be perfect. Too early, and the impact would be diminished. Too late, and I might miss the optimal window for maximum effect. My phone buzzed at exactly 4:05 with a text from the aviation company. Package delivered as requested. I smiled, finished my coffee, and drove toward my brother's house, taking the scenic route that would give me a few extra minutes to savor what was about to unfold. Because after 15 years of careful planning, strategic patience, and enduring countless humiliations from people who'd never built anything meaningful in their lives, justice was finally about to be served. And it was going to be absolutely spectacular. The scene that greeted me as I turned onto David Street was everything I'd hoped for and more. There, gleaming like a chrome-plated miracle in his driveway, sat my Gulfstream G650, $65 million of aerospace engineering, positioned with mathematical precision between his Honda Accord and Jessica's BMW. The contrast was so perfect, it looked like a movie set designed to illustrate the difference between ordinary and extraordinary. But the real masterpiece wasn't the aircraft itself. It was the crowd that had gathered to witness this impossible sight. Mrs. Patterson from next door stood on her front lawn with her mouth hanging open, probably wondering if she'd accidentally wandered onto the set of some billionaire reality show. The Hendersons had emerged from their house with their teenage kids, all four of them staring like they'd just witnessed an alien landing. Even old Mr. Kowalski had wheeled his garbage bin back up his driveway just to get a closer look at the impossible machine that had materialized in suburban paradise. And there, standing in their front doorway like deer caught in headlights, were David and Jessica. My brother looked confused, squinting at the aircraft like he might be hallucinating. But Jessica? Jessica looked like someone had just explained quantum physics using interpretive dance. Her perfectly composed suburban wife facade had cracked completely, revealing something raw and vulnerable underneath. I parked my Honda behind the jet's wing and climbed out slowly, savoring every second of this moment. The aviation crew was already performing their post-flight inspection with military precision, their crisp uniforms and professional demeanor adding another layer of authenticity to the scene. These weren't actors or props. This was real money, real power, real success that couldn't be faked or borrowed or explained away. "Marcus?" David's voice cracked slightly as he called across the driveway. "What the hell's going on?" I walked toward them with my hands in my pockets, the same casual stride I'd used thousands of times when delivering their pizza. Except now, instead of carrying cardboard boxes, I was carrying the weight of 15 years of hidden truth. The pizza delivery uniform had been replaced by a simple black suit, expensive but understated, the kind worn by people who didn't need to advertise their wealth because their actions spoke louder than any logo ever could. "Hey guys," I said, my voice carrying across the suddenly quiet neighborhood. "Sorry about the size of that delivery truck. I may have undersold it a little bit." Jessica's mouth opened and closed several times before any sound emerged. "That's not a truck," she finally whispered, her voice barely audible above the murmur of gathering neighbors. "That's a private jet. That's a $60 million private jet sitting in our driveway." "Actually," I corrected gently, "it's a $65 million private jet. But who's counting?" The crowd was growing by the minute. I could see curtains twitching in windows up and down the street as word spread through the neighborhood's informal communication network. The miller's teenage son was already live streaming on his phone, no doubt sharing this impossible sight with his social media followers. Mrs. Chen had emerged from her house with a cup of tea, settling into her porch chair like she was preparing to watch a particularly entertaining episode of her favorite drama series. But the real show was happening right in front of me, in the expressions on my family's faces, as reality slowly penetrated their carefully constructed assumptions about my life. "David," I said, turning to address my brother directly, "remember when you asked me what kind of side project I was working on? This is it. 15 years of side projects, actually." I pulled out my phone and showed him a screenshot of my investment portfolio, just the summary page, with enough zeros to make his accounting brain start working overtime. David's face went through several color changes as he processed the numbers, his professional training warring with his personal disbelief. "That can't be real," Jessica said, but her voice lacked conviction. Her eyes kept darting between the aircraft, the phone screen, and my face, searching for some explanation that would make sense of this impossible situation. "It's very real," I assured her. "Just like that lecture you gave me about dignity and respect. Remember that conversation, Jessica? Something about embarrassing the family? About what the neighbors might think?" The crowd had grown large enough that I could feel their collective attention like a physical weight. Every word I spoke was being absorbed by dozens of ears, processed by dozens of minds that were rapidly recalculating everything they thought they knew about the dynamics of this family. The pizza delivery guy wasn't the family disappointment after all. The pizza delivery guy was apparently the family success story, and nobody had bothered to look beneath the surface long enough to notice. You've been lying to us, David said, his voice mixing hurt with anger. For how long? How long have you been pretending to struggle while you were actually— Actually what? I interrupted. Actually successful. Actually building something meaningful instead of just managing other people's money? Actually proving that sometimes the most powerful people are the ones you'd never suspect. I gestured toward the aircraft, where the crew was finishing their inspection and preparing for departure. This isn't pretending, David. This is the result of 15 years of strategic thinking, disciplined investing, and understanding that real wealth doesn't need to announce itself with expensive cars and designer clothes. But why? Jessica's voice had risen to something approaching a shriek. Why would you let us think you were failing? Why would you let us worry about you? Why would you let me say those things about dignity and respect when I was actually what, Jessica? Successful enough to make your husband look like an entry-level employee? Wealthy enough to buy and sell this entire neighborhood without checking my account balance? Powerful enough to park a private jet in your driveway just to prove a point? The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the jet's auxiliary power unit humming in the background, a $65 million punctuation mark to my rhetorical question. Around us, the crowd had grown to include most of the immediate neighbors, their faces reflecting various combinations of shock, awe, and social media-worthy entertainment. Mrs. Patterson, who'd lived next door to David and Jessica for 8 years, was the first to break the silence. "Jessica, honey," she called across the lawn. "Is this your brother-in-law, the one who delivers pizzas?" The question hung in the air like smoke, carrying implications that rippled through the gathered crowd like stones dropped in still water. Because suddenly, everyone was recalculating their assumptions about success, about appearances, about the reliable correlation between job titles and personal worth. "Yes," Jessica managed to say, her voice barely carrying across the distance. "That's Marcus. The man with the private jet," Mrs. Patterson continued, clearly enjoying this unexpected neighborhood drama. "The pizza delivery man with the $65 million airplane." I could see the social calculations happening in real time across multiple faces. The Hendersons, who'd always treated me with polite condescension during neighborhood gatherings, were suddenly looking at me like I might be someone worth knowing. The Miller boy had stopped live streaming and started taking selfies, probably hoping to capture some reflected glory from proximity to genuine wealth. Even old Mr. Kowalski was nodding approvingly, like he'd always suspected there was more to the quiet pizza guy than met the eye. But the most interesting transformation was happening in Jessica herself. The woman who'd spent 15 years treating me like social contamination was now staring at me with something approaching reverence. Her entire worldview was crumbling in real time as she realized that her carefully maintained social hierarchy had been built on completely false information. "Marcus," she said, her voice taking on the tone people use when they're trying to repair a relationship they've just discovered they need. I had no idea. If I'd known, if I'd understood. "If you'd understood what, Jessica? That success doesn't always look like what you expect? That judging people by their job titles might not be the most reliable strategy? That maybe, just maybe, the pizza delivery guy you've been condescending to for 15 years actually understands money better than your accountant husband?" The crowd was loving every second of this performance. I could see neighbors pulling out phones, no doubt texting friends and family about the incredible scene unfolding in the Hills District this Friday afternoon. By evening, this story would be spreading through social media networks, neighborhood group chats, and dinner table conversations across the entire metropolitan area. David, meanwhile, was staring at the aircraft like it might disappear if he looked away. His financial mind was clearly working overtime, trying to reconcile the brother he thought he knew with the evidence of wealth that couldn't be ignored or explained away. "How long have you been planning this?" he asked quietly. "Planning what? The success or the revelation?" "This. All of this. The jet, the timing, He gestured helplessly at the crowd of neighbors who were now treating his driveway like free entertainment. "I've been building wealth for 15 years, I said. But I've been planning this specific moment for about 3 years. Ever since Jessica made it clear that she was embarrassed by my presence at family gatherings. Ever since you started introducing me to your friends as your brother, who hasn't quite figured out his career yet." The aviation crew leader approached with a clipboard, his timing perfect for maximum dramatic impact. "Mr. Sterling," he said, using my business name with professional courtesy. "We've completed the pre-departure inspection. Will you be flying with us today, or should we proceed to the next destination?" The use of my business name sent another ripple through the crowd. Mr. Sterling. Not Marcus the pizza guy, but Mr. Sterling, apparently important enough to own a private jet and command the respectful attention of professional aviation crews. "Actually," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I think I'll stay grounded today. Family matters to attend to, but thank you for positioning the aircraft so precisely." The presentation was exactly what I requested. "Of course, sir." The crew leader nodded professionally. "Should we maintain the current parking arrangement, or would you prefer relocation to the FBO?" "Let's leave it here for a few more hours," I decided. "I think my family is still processing the delivery." The crew leader smiled with the kind of professional discretion that expensive service providers perfect over years of dealing with wealthy clients. "Very good, sir. We'll be standing by." As the crew moved away to complete their departure preparations, I turned back to face David and Jessica, who were still standing in their doorway like statues witnessing the impossible. Around us, the neighborhood crowd was beginning to disperse, though I could see curtains still twitching in windows where people were maintaining surveillance on this unprecedented suburban drama. "So," I said, my voice carrying the same casual tone I'd used when delivering their pizzas, "about that conversation we had the other night, Jessica. You mentioned something about dignity and respect, about what successful people look like, about how appearances matter in determining someone's worth." Jessica's mouth worked silently, her social programming completely overwhelmed by the need to recalibrate everything she thought she understood about family hierarchies and personal success. "I think maybe," I continued, "you were operating with incomplete information." The understatement was so massive it bordered on comedy, but nobody was laughing. This wasn't a moment for humor. This was a moment for truth, for consequences, for the kind of reality adjustment that changes people permanently. David finally found his voice. "Marcus, I don't understand any of this. How did you build this kind of wealth delivering pizzas? Where did the money come from? Why didn't you tell us?" The questions were reasonable, the kind any rational person would ask when confronted with impossible contradictions. But they also revealed the fundamental assumption that had governed my family's treatment of me for 15 years, that my apparent circumstances were the complete picture of my actual circumstances. "David," I said, walking closer to where they stood, "the pizza delivery job was never about making money. It was about maintaining operational security while I built something real, something that couldn't be taken away by economic downturns or corporate restructuring or any of the other forces that control people who depend on traditional employment for their security." I could see him trying to process this information, his accountant's brain working to understand investment strategies and wealth accumulation methods that operated outside conventional financial planning. "You mean this whole time, while we thought you were struggling, you were actually building a fortune?" "I was building freedom," I corrected. "Financial freedom, operational freedom, the freedom to choose my battles and win them decisively. The kind of freedom that lets you park a private jet in someone's driveway just to make a point about assumptions and respect." Jessica had been quiet during this exchange, but now she stepped forward with something approaching desperation in her voice. "Marcus, I'm so sorry about what I said. About the dignity comment, about embarrassing the family. I had no idea about your situation. If you'd known I was wealthy, you would have treated me with respect," I finished for her. "But when you thought I was poor, respect wasn't necessary. When you assumed I was unsuccessful, dignity wasn't required. Is that really the lesson you want me to take from this conversation, Jessica?" The question hit its target with surgical precision. Around us, the remaining neighbors were watching this family drama unfold with the fascination people reserve for witnessing something they've never seen before and might never see again. But this wasn't just about Jessica's apology or David's confusion. This was about 15 years of accumulated disrespect, 15 years of being treated like the family charity case, 15 years of watching people judge my worth by surface-level appearances while never bothering to look deeper. The private jet sitting in their driveway wasn't just transportation, it was vindication. It was proof that their assumptions had been wrong, their judgments had been premature, and their treatment of me had been based on nothing more substantial than their own limited understanding of how success actually works. And the best part? This was just the beginning. The crowd was dispersing, but I could feel the energy still crackling through the neighborhood like electricity before a storm. Phone cameras had captured everything, and I knew this story would be spreading through social media faster than gossip at a church potluck. But the real show was just getting started. You see, parking the jet in their driveway was dramatic, sure, but it was also strategic. Because while Jessica and David were still processing the impossible sight of $65 million worth of aerospace engineering sitting next to their Honda Accord, I was already 3 moves ahead in a game they didn't even know they were playing. My phone buzzed with a text from my real estate attorney. The message was simple but devastating. Henderson property acquisition complete, closing documents signed, keys available Monday morning. I smiled and slipped the phone back into my pocket. The Henderson property. The one David and Jessica had been dreaming about for 2 years. The sprawling estate with mountain views that had just gone on the market last month. The same property Jessica had been obsessing over on social media, posting screenshots of the listing with captions like "someday" and "goals." Well, someday had arrived, just not for them. "Marcus," David said, his voice still carrying that shell-shocked quality of someone whose entire worldview had just been demolished. "Can we talk inside? Privately?" I glanced at the remaining neighbors, most of whom were pretending to water plants or check mailboxes while obviously straining to hear every word of this unprecedented suburban drama. "Of course," I said. "After all, family conversations should be private." We walked toward their front door, my footsteps echoing differently now that I wasn't carrying pizza boxes. Behind us, the Gulf Stream dominated their driveway like a chrome-plated reminder that appearances could be devastatingly deceiving. Mrs. Patterson was still standing on her lawn, phone pressed to her ear, no doubt spreading news of this impossible development to anyone who would listen. Inside their marble foyer, Jessica immediately began what I recognized as damage control mode. The same energy she'd used for years to manage social crises was now focused entirely on salvaging her relationship with someone she'd just discovered might actually matter. "Marcus," she began, her voice carrying that breathless quality people use when they're trying to rebuild bridges they've accidentally burned. "I need you to understand that everything I said the other night, it came from a place of concern. I was worried about you, about your future, about your reputation," I interrupted gently. "About what the neighbors might think when they saw my Honda in your driveway. About how my pizza delivery uniform might reflect on your social standing." The words hung in their expensive air like smoke, impossible to ignore or explain away. Jessica's face cycled through several expressions before settling on something approaching genuine remorse. "Yes," she admitted quietly, "that's exactly what I was worried about. And I was wrong. Completely, totally wrong." David had moved to their living room window, staring out at the aircraft like it might disappear if he stopped watching it. His accountant's brain was clearly working overtime, trying to calculate net worth, cash flow, investment strategies that could produce this level of wealth. "Marcus," he said without turning around, "the numbers don't make sense. Even if you'd saved every penny from pizza delivery for 15 years, even with perfect investments, the math doesn't work. Where did the real money come from?" It was a fair question, the kind any financial professional would ask when confronted with impossible contradictions. But it also revealed the fundamental limitation in their thinking. They were still trying to understand extraordinary success through ordinary frameworks. "David," I said, settling into their expensive leather armchair like I owned the place, which, considering my net worth compared to theirs, wasn't entirely inaccurate. The pizza delivery job generated maybe $20,000 a year. "Do you really think I built this kind of wealth on restaurant wages?" "Then what?" Jessica demanded, her voice sharp with frustration. "What have you been doing for 15 years while we thought you were delivering food?" "Building an empire," I replied simply. "One investment at a time, one business acquisition at a time, one strategic decision at a time. While you were focused on appearances and social climbing, I was focused on understanding how money actually works." I pulled out my phone and opened the banking app for one of my smaller accounts, the one I used for routine expenses. Even this secondary account showed a balance that exceeded their combined annual income by several multiples. "This is just my walking around money," I said, showing them the screen. The real assets are held in offshore trusts, real estate investment companies, and private equity funds that most people have never heard of. David's face went pale as he processed the numbers. Jesus Christ, Marcus. You're talking about generational wealth. You're talking about never needing to work another day in your life. Actually, I said, I passed that threshold about 8 years ago. Everything since then has just been keeping score. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Jessica's designer heels clicking against their marble floors as she paced nervously. Outside, I could see neighbors still lingering, some walking dogs that probably didn't need walking, others finding excuses to linger in their front yards while sneaking glances at the impossible machine parked in suburban paradise. But here's what they still didn't understand. The jet, the wealth, the 15 years of strategic invisibility, none of it was really about money. It was about power. The power to choose your battles, to control your circumstances, to reveal truth when the timing was perfect for maximum impact. And I wasn't finished revealing truth. My phone rang, the business line, and I answered it while they watched with growing fascination. Marcus Sterling speaking, I said, using my business name with casual authority. Yes, the Seattle acquisition is moving forward as planned. Have the lawyers finished the due diligence on the Portland properties? Excellent. And the Vancouver development project? Perfect. Transfer authorization approved. I hung up and looked at their stunned faces. Sorry about that. Business doesn't stop for family drama. Seattle acquisition? David's voice cracked slightly. Portland properties? Marcus, what exactly do you do? I develop commercial real estate across the Pacific Northwest, I explained. Shopping centers, office buildings, luxury residential projects, the kind of investments that generate passive income while you sleep. Jessica had stopped pacing and was staring at me like she was seeing a completely different person, which, in a way, she was. For 15 years, they'd been interacting with Marcus the pizza guy, a carefully constructed persona designed to deflect attention while I built something extraordinary. Now they were meeting Marcus Sterling, the real estate mogul who owned more property than some small cities. But the most beautiful part wasn't the shock on their faces or the growing crowd of neighbors documenting this suburban spectacle. The most beautiful part was knowing that this revelation was perfectly timed with something that would devastate them far more than wounded pride. Because while they'd been busy judging my pizza delivery uniform, I'd been quietly acquiring something they wanted more than anything else in the world. And tomorrow morning, they were going to discover exactly what happens when you underestimate someone for 15 years. My phone buzzed with another message, this one from my private investigator. The report I'd commissioned 3 months ago was finally complete, and the contents were going to make this weekend absolutely unforgettable. You see, successful revenge isn't just about proving your point, it's about timing multiple revelations to create maximum psychological impact. The jet was just the opening act. The real estate empire was the second movement. But the finale was going to be absolutely devastating. I stood up from their expensive furniture and straightened my jacket, the same casual movement I'd made thousands of times when finishing pizza deliveries. Except now, instead of heading back to a minimum wage job, I was heading to my penthouse apartment downtown, the one they didn't know existed, to prepare for tomorrow's revelation. Well, I said, my voice carrying the same friendly tone I'd used when bringing them dinner. This has been enlightening, but I should probably get going. Early morning tomorrow. Going where? Jessica asked desperately, clearly panicked about losing control of this situation. Business meeting, I replied. Property acquisition closing. You know how it is with real estate transactions. Lots of paperwork, lots of signatures, lots of money changing hands. David walked me to the door, his movements mechanical, like someone sleepwalking through an impossible dream. Outside, the Gulf Stream still dominated their driveway, surrounded by neighbors who were now treating it like a tourist attraction. The Miller boy was charging kids $5 each to take selfies next to the aircraft, entrepreneurial spirit that I had to admire. Marcus, David said as we reached the door, I don't understand any of this, but I need you to know that I'm proud of you. Confused as hell, but proud. It was the first genuine thing he'd said to me in years, and despite everything, I felt a flicker of the old affection I'd once had for my brother. Before Jessica's influence had poisoned our relationship, before social climbing had become more important than family loyalty, before appearances had mattered more than character. "Thanks, David," I said, and meant it. That actually means something to me. But as I walked toward my Honda, parked now in the shadow of my private jet, I couldn't help but smile at the irony. Tomorrow morning, when they discovered what I'd really been doing while they thought I was failing, that pride was going to transform into something much more complicated. Because the Henderson estate wasn't the only property I'd acquired recently. Over the past 6 months, I'd been systematically purchasing every piece of real estate they'd ever expressed interest in. The downtown condo Jessica had bookmarked on her laptop, the mountain cabin David had mentioned wanting for retirement, even the little coffee shop where Jessica held her book club meetings. All of it now belonged to me, acquired through shell companies and investment trusts that kept my name out of public records until the moment I chose to reveal it. And that moment was scheduled for tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, when the local newspaper published the feature article I'd arranged about successful entrepreneurs who'd built empires while maintaining operational invisibility. The article that would include detailed photographs of my property portfolio, my investment strategies, and most importantly, a complete list of my recent acquisitions, including the Henderson estate that Jessica and David had been dreaming about, budgeting for, and planning their future around. The estate I'd purchased in cash 3 days ago, closing the deal while they were still figuring out mortgage pre-approval. I climbed into my Honda and started the engine, the familiar sputter providing a perfect contrast to the aerospace engineering gleaming behind me. Tomorrow, this beat-up delivery car would be replaced by something more appropriate to my actual net worth. But tonight, I wanted to savor this moment of perfect irony. As I drove away from their house, I could see Jessica and David in my rearview mirror, still standing in their doorway, staring at the impossible machine that had materialized in their suburban paradise. Around them, neighbors continued to gather, phones out, documenting this unprecedented disruption of their carefully ordered world. But the real disruption hadn't even started yet. My phone rang as I turned onto the main road, heading toward downtown and the penthouse apartment that represented my actual lifestyle. The caller ID showed my property manager's number. "Marcus," she said, her voice carrying the efficient professionalism I'd come to expect from people who managed 8-figure real estate portfolios. "The Henderson property keys are ready for pickup. Security codes have been changed, utilities transferred, landscaping crew scheduled for Monday morning, everything exactly as you requested." "Perfect," I replied. "And the newspaper interview is confirmed for tomorrow morning?" 10 o'clock sharp. The photographer will be there at 9:30 for property shots. This is going to be quite a reveal, Marcus. Are you sure you're ready for the attention? I glanced in my rearview mirror at the glow of lights from David and Jessica's neighborhood, where my private jet was still parked like a $65 million conversation piece. "I've been ready for 15 years, I said. "It's time to show everyone who Marcus Sterling really is." The drive to downtown took 20 minutes through streets I'd traveled thousands of times in this same Honda, delivering pizzas to people who'd never looked beyond the uniform to see the man underneath. Tomorrow, every single one of those people was going to recalculate their assumptions about success, about appearances, about the reliable correlation between job titles and personal worth. But more importantly, Jessica and David were going to discover that underestimating someone for 15 years comes with consequences that extend far beyond wounded pride. When you judge people by surface appearances, when you treat family members like social liabilities, when you prioritize reputation over relationships, you create enemies where you could have had allies. And I'd been a very patient enemy. The penthouse elevator rose silently toward the 42nd floor, carrying me away from the persona I'd maintained for 15 years toward the reality I'd built while everyone was looking the other way. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the lights of the city sprawling below, including the distant glow from David and Jessica's neighborhood where my Gulfstream was still creating suburban chaos. Tomorrow morning, that chaos was going to become something much more permanent, because while they'd been busy being embarrassed by my pizza delivery uniform, I'd been quietly becoming the most successful member of our family by margins that would make their heads spin. And now, it was time for them to learn what happens when you spend 15 years treating your biggest asset like your greatest liability. The elevator doors opened onto marble floors and imported furniture, the kind of understated luxury that whispers instead of screaming. This was my real home, the place where Marcus Sterling lived when he wasn't playing Marcus the Pizza Guy for audiences who couldn't see past their own assumptions. I poured myself a glass of wine from the collection I'd been building for a decade, walked to the windows overlooking the city, and raised a toast to the empty room. To 15 years of strategic patience, I said aloud, and to tomorrow morning when patience finally pays dividends. Outside, the city lights twinkled like stars, each one representing someone who was about to discover that the quiet pizza delivery guy they'd dismissed was actually one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the Pacific Northwest. But the most important discovery was still 12 hours away, when David and Jessica opened their newspaper to find a full-page feature about my real estate empire, complete with photographs of properties they'd dreamed of owning, budgeted for, and lost to someone they'd never considered competition. Someone they'd spent 15 years treating like the family disappointment while he quietly became the family fortune. The wine tasted like victory, and tomorrow was going to taste even better. Saturday morning arrived with crystalline clarity, the kind of Pacific Northwest dawn that makes everything look like a movie set designed for dramatic revelations. I stood at my penthouse windows, coffee in hand, watching the city wake up below while my phone buzzed with updates from the media campaign I'd orchestrated with the precision of a military operation. The first text came at 7:15 from my publicist. Article goes live in 45 minutes. Photo spread looks incredible. Henderson estate shots are particularly stunning. The second message arrived from my property manager. All acquisition documents ready for media release. Legal has confirmed everything is bulletproof. But the third message made me smile wider than any financial statement ever could. It was from Mrs. Patterson, David's neighbor, sent to a number she'd somehow obtained through her impressive suburban intelligence network. "Marcus, honey, I don't know what's happening, but that airplane is still in your brother's driveway and there's a news van parked across the street. Are you famous?" Famous. The word carried implications I'd been carefully avoiding for 15 years. But strategic invisibility had served its purpose, and now it was time for strategic visibility. Time for the pizza delivery guy to disappear forever and Marcus Sterling to take his rightful place in the world. At exactly 8 o'clock, my phone rang with David's number. I let it ring 4 times before answering, savoring the desperation I could already hear in his voice. "Marcus, there are reporters outside our house," he said without preamble. "They're asking about you, about the jet, about something called Sterling Properties. What the hell is Sterling Properties?" "My real estate development company," I replied calmly, watching traffic move through downtown streets where I owned more buildings than most people realized. The one that's been acquiring properties across the Northwest for the past decade. "Your company?" His voice climbed an octave. "Marcus, you can't just have a company. Companies require capital, business plans, employees. You deliver pizzas." "I used to deliver pizzas," I corrected. "That cover story expired yesterday when I parked $65 million in your driveway. Today I'm meeting with the Business Journal about my acquisition strategy and expansion plans." The silence stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally David spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "The Henderson estate. Jessica saw something on social media about it being sold. Please tell me you didn't—" "Closed on it Thursday morning," I confirmed. "All cash offer, no contingencies. Your wife's dream house now belongs to me." The sound David made wasn't quite a sob, wasn't quite a scream, but something in between that spoke to dreams dying in real time. Through my penthouse windows, I could see the morning sun painting golden light across buildings I owned, streets where I'd built wealth while wearing a pizza delivery uniform that had hidden everything from everyone. "Why?" he asked finally. "Why would you do this to us? Why would you let us think you were struggling while you were building an empire? Why would you buy the house Jessica wanted when you knew how much it meant to her?" "Because," I said, my voice carrying 15 years of accumulated truth, "you spent 15 years treating me like I was worthless. Because Jessica lectured me about dignity while judging my worth by my job title. Because neither of you ever bothered to look deeper than surface appearances to see who I really was. But we're family. Family doesn't abandon each other at the first sign of social embarrassment. Family doesn't judge each other's value by their employer's logo. Family doesn't spend 15 years apologizing for someone's existence while that someone is quietly becoming more successful than everyone else combined." At 9 o'clock sharp, the newspaper article went live across every digital platform in the Pacific Northwest. "The Pizza Delivery Mogul: How Marcus Sterling Built a Real Estate Empire While Flying Under Everyone's Radar." complete with photographs of properties worth more than some small country's GDP, detailed analysis of investment strategies that had generated returns most hedge funds would kill for, and interviews with business leaders who'd been quietly partnering with me for years. My phone exploded with notifications. Text messages from people I hadn't heard from in decades, suddenly remembering what great friends we'd been. Calls from reporters wanting interviews, investment firms offering partnerships, social climbers desperate to retroactively claim connections to someone who'd just been revealed as one of the region's most successful entrepreneurs. But the message that mattered most came at 9:30 from Jessica's number. Just 3 words that carried more weight than any business deal I'd ever closed. "We need help." I smiled and poured myself another cup of coffee, watching the city below begin to buzz with news of the revelation that would change everything for everyone who'd ever underestimated the quiet pizza guy. Help was exactly what they needed, and for the first time in 15 years, I was in a position to provide it on my terms, with my conditions, at my price. The game was over, and I'd won so completely that even I was impressed by the final score. But the most satisfying victory wasn't financial or social or even personal. It was the knowledge that from this moment forward, no one would ever again judge my worth by my uniform, my car, or their assumptions about what success was supposed to look like. Marcus Sterling was finally home, and the pizza delivery guy was just a memory of strategic patience that had paid the ultimate dividend. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.